Hello and welcome to The Other Way, a lifestyle podcast exploring uncommon, unconventional, or otherwise alternative approaches to health, spirituality, identity, work, and life. I'm your host, Kasha. I'm the founder of InFlow, a women's wellness brand that designs intentional products to help women reconnect to their unique cyclical rhythms and find a balance between being and doing. This podcast is an extension of my mission with InFlow. Here, you'll find interviews with inspiring humans, trailblazers, researchers, spiritual teachers, and more, all on the journey of doing things the other way. Now, let's dive in. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm so excited to be back on here and welcoming my next guest. I am home in California if you're watching this on video. By the way, I want to give a quick shout out. We are now live on YouTube, and I'm so excited to be bringing video versions of the podcast. So if you want to see the guests that I'm speaking with, if you want to watch this podcast, please do head over to YouTube, and we're going to be live on Spotify with video in the next couple of weeks. So, woo, so exciting. And in a similar vein, I am so excited to welcome my next guest, Bristol Baughan, to the podcast. Bristol is the founder of Regenerative Media Lab. She is an author, a professional leadership coach, and executive producer of Emmy-winning and Oscar-nominated films. As though her background isn't impressive enough, the thing that I actually found super fascinating is her approach to success and how she has redefined her relationship with success and how she has discovered a regenerative fuel to drive that success. So for those of you who have been listening for a while, you'll know that I spent over a decade working in Silicon Valley. In fact, I still consult in tech. I work for a pretty incredible AI startup here in the Bay, and I lead their product team. And one of the things that I remember acutely struggling with at the height of my career was finding a sustainable regenerative fuel to drive my success, meaning that the place from which I drove my energy and my motivation often led to burnout, and that led to health issues, autoimmune flares, feeling disembodied and disconnected from my body. And it has been such a journey, not just coming back to my body and rediscovering what balance and health looks like for me, but also shifting my perspective and my approach to work. And I truly think that it is possible to succeed and build a career and to do so in a regenerative and sustainable way. And Bristol is truly one of the first guests that I've had on the podcast that can so eloquently describe how to do that. Not just why is it important and her own journey, which she definitely dives into, but how to tap into that regenerative fuel, that regenerative motivation, and how to really live our lives with that philosophy at the forefront. So we're covering all of that. And we're also going to be talking about some other interesting topics, such as surrender and how to practice surrender and how that isn't giving up. So a powerful reframe there. We're going to discuss the importance of cycles in our work and creativity and creation process. We're going to talk about masculine and feminine energy in the workplace from not a gendered place, but more of a yin and a yang place, and how we can cultivate more of one or the other if we feel out of balance. And of course, we're definitely going to be covering one of my favorite topics, which is identity, and how we are so latched onto our identity being who we are, aka what we do, and how to really reframe that for ourselves. If you are interested in any of these topics, this episode is a must listen, and thank you again for joining us. Let's jump on in. Bristol, welcome to The Other Way.
Thank you. Lovely to see you or hear you.
You're dialing in from Portugal today.
Yes, I am from the Azores. I'm on an island called São Miguel in the Azores, which is 2 hours into the ocean from Lisbon and 4.5 hours to New York.
Oh my gosh, that sounds blissful, so blissful. And we were talking right before we started recording that I absolutely love this switch because you were based in California, actually, where I am right now, or where I live since I'm in New York at the moment. And I love that intercontinental switch. So that is definitely inspiring. So go you for doing that. I
It's
definitely plan to do it one day. But before we dive into that or any of the other questions that I have listed, I want to kick it off with a question that I love to ask every guest when we start, which is what are three words that you would use to describe yourself?
authentic, loving, and unique. Sure. Yeah. Unique.
You're definitely not treading the most common path with your jumps around your work and also some of the changes that you made personally. So I could see that. I think that's such a good place to start because your journey is very unique and you are so accomplished. Like when I was preparing for this interview, I'm like, okay, how do I rattle this off of my tongue? Because you're a founder, you're an author, you're a coach, you're an executive producer of Emmy-winning and Oscar-nominated films, and that's just to name a few of your accomplishments. But what I find so fascinating is not even all the very impressive things that you've done in your professional life, but that you've done this with a very regenerative philosophy in mind as opposed to extractive. And I don't know if that has been for you the entirety of your career, but that has definitely been the shift that you've moved towards. I would love for you to share with us a bit of your story because I think this kind of inspiration for doing things differently in a very kind of accomplishment, goal oriented world is just so needed.
Definitely did not start with regeneration in mind. I just learned what that word meant in 2018. So, or 2017. So I would say I came at life like most of us in a Western culture where I was very much wanting to compete and win in a game that for me personally had to be of some level of wanting to make social impact. So it was never just wanting to win the game for myself alone, but how do I make the most impact I possibly can was a guiding force and ambition that I was carrying around. And so I went to my first internships were on Wall Street in New York and went to NYU for the summer and a spring semester and eventually made the move out to Los Angeles and started working my way up in the film business, which I would say is probably infamous for being one of the most extractive places culturally, creatively. There's a lot of beautiful things about it that I'm super grateful I got to experience. I used to say one of the things I loved about Los Angeles was you could have an idea in the morning and that you could be shooting in the afternoon and have cast and blown snow or literally done anything your imagination could imagine.
Magic, literally.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a great thing. But it was also a place where I was learning about what who am I? What is my life really about? And I feel like until I was 28, that was very much a more unconscious question. It wasn't one that I was super deeply excavating. I was very much on a mission to save the world through storytelling. I was like, how can I tell stories that move people to give a damn, to engage, to feel connected to themselves? But the way I was going about it was textbook extractive, operating under the scarcity mindset that I wasn't enough and nothing was enough. So it didn't matter how many things I accomplished or how much good any of these films could do. It was never, ever enough. And
Mm.
that was a heartbreaking awareness that really led me on a totally different journey. But I would say it took me many years to make the shift from less extractive to more regenerative ways of being. And I always use less and more when describing that because none of these are a finished state. Like we're not going to
Mm.
reach the pure regeneration state. And that's what I believe. So it's like taking off the perfection, holy grail kind of mission orientation and just starting to really test the question that I was forced to test was, is there another fuel for accomplishment or career other than external validation winning awards, being the best, perceived by others as the best. And so that I would say was the first chunk of my journey that led to this kind of spiritual surrender experiment adventure that I've been on ever since. And so that journey is what I'm writing a book about because and I'm overwhelmed with how many influences it really took, how much inner work it really took to make the shift from being predominantly extractive of my own energy, of the earth's resources, in order to reach certain metrics of success that now I no longer hold as strongly. Again, not that they're not
Mm.
there, they're just my need to own multiple houses and have become a unicorn and which are mythical characters. It's like that fuel has shifted.
Mm. Oh my gosh. Okay, I feel like we need to pause here for a minute because this is just so deeply relatable. Like I identify as a recovering type A and I come from Silicon Valley, like the tech industry. I feel like this is just such a common theme for so many people. Basically most people, right?
Yeah.
Because we live in a world that is very individualistic. It is a capitalist world and our values and honestly, in many cases, I feel like our worth, as you were describing, is so tied to what it is that we do, right? Like, even in this interview, I was like, I was reflecting on it as you were speaking. Like, we immediately dove into, okay, your professional achievements, as though that is everything that you are. And as I was saying it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is typically what we put in our bios, but there's so much more to us as humans that we don't acknowledge and we don't really tap into that because that's not what is predominantly praised and valued in our society. So this is
Exactly.
like a very revolutionary way of thinking.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like there's a bunch of people who came before and have been talking about this, and we all put the quotes up on Instagram, like Alan Watts and Adrian Lord, and like all these incredible teachers and guides that have really rebelled against kind of structures of all this kind of oppression. And it's always, oh, we look up to that, but I just gotta but I gotta win the game. That's for them. And that's not for me. And I feel like the spiritual awakening process, how do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Oh, I'm 35. I'm 35 turning 36.
Okay, beautiful. Happy almost birthday. I
Yeah.
love you. So not like a young one. Like I'm 35, but turning 36.
Oh man, I cope with this every day. That's like a whole nother podcast topic, like age in today's society. But yes, we don't have to go there.
No, and so you're on the other side of the Saturn return, but like
Yes.
that moment around 27, 28, 29, when all of a sudden it was like the floor fell out. Like, whoa, I have beliefs. I'm I have ways of thinking that actually create the life that I'm living, that some of which are maybe mine from my own personal experience, and some of which have just been handed down unconsciously from my parents, from my culture. Oh, wait a minute. I have a say in how I view the world view,
Mm,
right? But that only comes with aging. So and letting these moments where the floor falls out be honored as a part of a spiritual journey that every indigenous culture has understood for millennia. And we're one of the only ones that
mm,
hasn't built into our rituals and practices the idea that you reach these ages and you go through these radical transitions hormonally, neural. It's like we now have science to prove all of this, not necessarily that we needed it to have rituals, but it is fascinating how that wasn't available to me to question my beliefs or
mm.
care about this or that before I hit that moment where it was like, wait a minute, if this is winning and I feel disconnected and deeply alone and never enough, like, wait, the game is rigged. So that's what led to
Mm.
all the spiritual stuff, because I definitely wasn't interested.
So this is quite wild. So you are in many ways, I think one could say like at the peak of your career or definitely like nearing like this just like really high point, right? So it's all the things that you had been working towards. And then suddenly you're having this questioning of, okay, what am I working towards? Or what is the energy? I think you said it so well. It's like, where is the fuel coming from? It's coming from this place of never enough, like scarcity, constant competition, right? Which I think is, again, like one way to view the world, the predominant way to view the world. And it was having an effect on you. What was it like turning to look at this? Because we talk about the perspective of identity. And I'm assuming that this must have been such a challenging time to actually see these views, witness them, and then perhaps choose a different path because the path that got you to where you are,
Yeah.
right? And so what was that process like? Can you share a bit about that?
Great question. Yeah. Woo. It was terrifying. It was when I say the floor fell out, like it was really like everything I thought to be true was suddenly a question. And I didn't have necessarily people around me or community that was like, oh, yes, welcome to this phase of your life. Now you're going to go into this. No, I did have a few mentors that were trying. And I was like, that's not going to make me more productive. And so I resisted for as long as I possibly could until I got depressed. And so it was really having to look at how attached I was to that identity of a producer. It's almost laughable, like being in the film business, like producer is the title. So my worth was equal to what I could produce. And then it was realizing, like, wait a minute, like, it didn't matter if I had done 5 films in 6 years, or I did it, or we started this and we did that and all the things. It was like, "Oh, wait, it doesn't none of it will ever be enough." And also what was motivating me, which I think is a lot of people as well, but it is a kind of certain subgenre, was this feeling that the world was broken and mine alone to fix.
So relatable, that extreme accountability, responsibility, and also at the same time helplessness, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oof,
And
that's
helplessness was
mhm.
not a word in my vocabulary. It wasn't allowed. I wasn't allowing myself to feel any of that. I prided myself on my ability to repress emotion, to ignore it in order to do. It was like, no, push that away. I don't need to feel that. I mean, my dad literally was diagnosed with cancer around this time. My parents had been
Mm.
going through a divorce. My company that I had been working with, it was my like work. I was using metaphors, right? That we were in battle. This was my baby, my life, my husband. I was using these in all earnest. Like there was no,
Oh, I understand. Oh, I understand. The war room,
yeah,
like, the yeah, okay.
like those moments where you're just like, you don't realize how deep in it. And so one of the metaphors that I came to me as I started writing was it felt like I had been in this trench. And inside of the trench was this cozy career validation world where I had awards, I had nice things, I had access to powerful people and events. And then all of a sudden, when the burnout started reaching epic depression portion, I started to notice this kind of tear in the roof. The trench had this this, I didn't even realize it was this kind of flimsy roof on it. And all of a sudden it started
Mm.
peeling back. And then it was the realization that there was a ladder and I could climb up and out of the trench. And then it was being in this in between space of looking everywhere I could see. And it was trenches of beliefs, trenches of identities. Of wow, maybe I want to become a yogi. I could join the yogi trench. I really wanted a man. I could get into the find me a boyfriend trench. I could be a girlfriend. I could be a wife. It's like this being without an identity, which was producer, right? Which was productive human being, successful, yada, yada, was truly one of the most horrifying experiences of my ego's existence. And it was really having to trust that there was something else beyond it. I didn't even know there was a roof to it. And then all of a sudden there's no roof. And now I notice there's a bunch of identities. And then well, what's it, the space in between identities, this liminal space? Who am I now if I'm not the producer identity? I just feel like I'm talking constantly. So you tell me.
I think this is just so huge, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about actually, because I feel like as humans, and I don't know if I could say that everybody has this experience, but I think a lot of people have the experience of the shifts in identity. It's such a natural thing, but it's such an uncomfortable thing because we as humans really resist it change and shifts, right? And so there's this like notion of, okay, like I am a producer or I am a wife or I am a mother. And then we try to really encompass those identities in their entirety. And I reflect on this quite a bit because I have some friends who are recent mothers, and there's this like wild upheaval of this change in their lives of who are they, right? Are they still founders, but they don't feel like founders necessarily because they don't have as much time, and like things are changing for them and their sleep schedule is different, and then now they feel like that there's like all this mothering responsibility, so am I a mother, right? And there's this strange need I think we have, and I don't know if this is like a very western thing, but there's a strange need as you described those trenches. I think that was really well said. It's like you want to drop into another one,
Yeah,
right? If not this one, then it must be that one, right? Like it can't be a blend of any of them. And I so understand and relate to this. And I think a lot of listeners will too, that there's this aspect of, okay, especially those of us on the spiritual path who are trying to reconcile our experiences in our like work world with our spiritual world. There's this feeling that I've had many times, not as much now, but where it's okay, the person I am on a yoga retreat or meditation retreat is so different than the person I am when I'm working. And I think the reconciling of that is like the most challenging journey. And that's what I'm hearing you describe with these trenches. And I think it's so well said. It's like, how do they not become like individual trenches where every single shift is also like a battle zone? As you go from trench to trench, it's like you're exposed, you're like a hermit without your hermit crab without a shell. It's so scary. But like, how can we start to just blend all these identities that they're all part of us and we don't have to be like 100% this or 100% that? That is such a challenge. I don't know why, if you've thought about why, but that is such a real challenge for people, for myself, at least, I can
sure.
say.
No, I think it is a human experience. Identification is literally what we do. We identify with all kinds of things. I can identify with this room, this town, this place, my family, my lineage. So it's part of what we do. And I think for me, I had to go to school. I went and got this master's degree in spiritual psychology, not because I was like, oh, I really want to study spiritual psychology. It was because I was really starting not to trust the ambition that was moving me. That fuel
Mhm.
felt like fossil fuels do now. Like there was something about it that
Mm,
was cheap and it burned fast. No matter what, it just kept burning out. Didn't matter how much I hacked
mm,
myself or my schedule or whatever. It was like, nope, like this fuel is an underlying issue. And so when I went and studied
mm,
spiritual psych, part of that entire program and part of any spirituality or realm that you can dive into will often help us to not identify with anything external, where it's like, oh, I am a soul having a human experience. I'm a spiritual being learning on earth. It's all still some form of creative imagination, but which script, essentially, which belief is going to help us to thrive as
mm.
an organism inside of an organism, not just thrive in my career, but thrive
Yeah.
as a part of this planet, that is a part of a species, is a part of infinite. There's so many species. So I feel like the question of what do you identify with is a great one. And at USM, the way it was presented was that we are essentially loving presence. We are this divine being having this human experience. And so we identify with this essence, this thing beyond identity, and we try on identities. Like we get to play them almost like a character on a stage. I get
Mm,
to play the mother for a period. I get to play the founder for a period. I get to play
mhm,
leadership coach and now author. And it's so interesting now because there's part of me that's if you really identified with this identity, you'd work harder. If you attached to some outcomes, you would probably be further along. And it's like really having to part of me that always wants to be further along to be like, can I, as long as I'm showing up, like you have to keep showing up. As long as I'm
Mhm.
showing up and I'm doing it in a way that's more regenerative, then interesting. Is that a different kind of fuel?
Oof. I think that's so huge because one of the things that I think is really important that I wanna almost emphasize for listeners to reiterate what you said, it's that it's not about not having any fuel, which I think is, like, where we often or I can even relate that I have struggled with this. It's, "Oh my gosh," because of the burnout caused by how much I identified with my role as a product leader at Microsoft or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Because of that burnout, I need to let go of all of this, right? Like, I need to just be completely something different, and I cannot grasp onto or have ambitions at all,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that is actually I think what you're saying here is just so powerful because it's not about getting rid of the fire or the drive or the desire to create or the desire to make an impact or to do anything of what we deem valuable in our lives. It's about choosing a different source of energy. And I think that it sounds is the difference between a regenerative approach to our lives and to business and to creation versus something that is extremely extractive and unsustainable. Is that am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah. Yeah. Well done. And I love that you have that awareness around the Microsoft identity and the parts of us that after we go through a burnout, especially are like pushing away all these parts of us. It's like
Yeah.
you're the problem, right? And what we learn in parts work, Gestalt, internal family systems, all this stuff is playing the same playground. It is really like you don't get rid of the ambitious, hardworking, competitive, capitalist part of ourselves.
Mhm.
It's just starting to realize, wow, okay, that part might have a few misunderstandings about what will lead to fulfillment. And so then
Mhm.
I just start to do some forgiveness. I start to do some neuro linguistic reprogramming. There are all kinds of modalities, right, to do this work where you start to shift the beliefs that are creating the conditions for burnout. And part of that
Mhm.
is taking these parts of us and being like, come here, you crazy ambitious lady. Like, where are you trying to get? What's motivating you? Come here, sweetie. I got you. Like loving them back into the whole of ourselves versus having this part that we're trying to deny now, right? And who's always trying to be accepted or belong or be praised because that's supposed to mean love.
I think that's so huge. I'm curious because you've worked with leaders all around the world. And how much of this is something that women end up experiencing versus men? Is this like a masculine and feminine dynamic at play here too, right? Because there is an aspect to this, and I'm just having a very meta experience because I left Microsoft. I started studying Chinese medicine, where, of course, we dove deep into yin and yang theory, like yang energy being the productive, like kind of fiery energy, yin being like the rest, the creation kind of energy that comes from receiving versus grabbing and grasping. And it's not that one is bad, the other one is good. It's just that the imbalance is what causes disease in either direction, right?
Mm,
And the yin and yang is just such a parallel for not gendered even. I'm not talking about gendered, but almost like the masculine, the feminine energy from an energetic point of view. And I'm wondering with the leaders that you work with, is this something that everyone is waking up to? Is it something that women especially are experiencing because there is an aspect of almost like driving against our primal nature? That our nature as women is cyclical. It's cyclical like the seasons, right? Like we have 28-day cycles and we have cycles throughout our lives, like on a meta level, right? From going from child to maiden into our more fertile years into kind of menopause and then the crone stages. Like these are all cycles. So I'm just curious, in your experience, is this like a global suffering? Is this like something that women are uniquely like struggling to identify with? Like, what is your perspective on that
mm.
too?
Wow. Yeah. So well said about yin and yang. And my 2 cents, it was helpful for me. to have the feminine masculine language in the spiritual context. I studied Tantra for a little while, and it was really helpful when at a time when I felt hyper masculine. So I came out
Mm.
of the film business with this sense that, yeah, the feminine parts of me were being intentionally repressed, not by anyone necessarily other than myself. I'm sure it was happening culturally, but it was really me doing it. And so I think that, yes, there is a global shift happening. If I'm totally honest, I feel like there are a few indigenous actually prophecy that we are aware of that have been around for hundreds of years that have predicted this phase where the masculine kind of ran with the baton of evolution, of our growth here on this planet. And now the wing of the masculine has grown tired and is overworked. And the wing of the feminine, this is the prophecy of the Condor. The wing of the feminine is just underutilized. It's not as strong. It needs to gain muscle and power. And then this is where it will be balanced out eventually. And in in softening, in coming into relationship with the feminine inside of all of us, men and women, and valuing it as much as productivity. We would use the word soft as a pejorative in the film business. Oh, those people are soft, or that idea is soft, or it meant sentimental, like too feely, too woo. And so slowly having to come back in touch with these parts of myself that were soft, vulnerable, was hard work. And I see men and women. It was interesting. I mostly worked with women for a long time, and now I've had more men in my practice, and I'm seeing them. I
Mm.
mean, I literally just had this beautiful client talking about his devotion to Shakti and like feminine power, and like how he's cultivating it himself, and he wants to put the masculine in service to the feminine. I was just like, what? Like it is.
What an evolved man. Okay, let's just pause. Yeah, shout out to you, whoever you are.
Right? Really beautiful work is being done. And there is a little story I would love to share though, but by a mentor
Yeah.
or more of a hero, Lynn Twist. I don't know if you know of her work. She wrote The Soul of Money, and she started an organization called Pachamama Alliance in the Bay Area. It's all about the Amazon rainforest. And so she went down with her co-founders, her husband and this other wonderful dude. They went down to the Amazon to meet a tribe, the Sapara tribe. And when they got there, they were learning about the oil companies trying to come in and buy the land and extract oil. And so they wanted to help them hire lawyers and help protect them. And when they got there, they were like, "We're here to help you." And the Sapara were like, "Oh no, like we dreamed you here." And they were like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "No, they're a dream culture." And so in their dreams, they have interaction with multiple dimensions, spirit realms. I couldn't begin to explain it. But they apparently had invited these people to come, and they said to them, "We so appreciate your wanting to help us, but we actually think that you guys need our help. What's going on up there? Like the demand is coming from y'all." And they went on this tour. And at one point, this woman comes from like behind the crowd because there it's still pretty traditional. The men are leading the entourage. And a woman comes back and she grabs her arm, and through an interpreter, she says, "Where are your women?" And Lynn Twist is like, What do you mean?" She said, "We, our men, they go out and they hunt and they fish and they bring back wood for our homes, and we build the homes and we feed our people. And then we tell the men when we have enough. Why aren't your women telling your men that you have enough?" And of course, this isn't about gender. This is about the parts of us inside of us that's the never enough, must have more. And then the part inside that says, "What if this is enough? Can I be content in this moment?" You don't have to think about the rest of your life, but just this moment. What's possible if I can be content? And we have the cycles like you're talking about, like this indigenous woman's talking about. It's just seasonal. Nobody's saying stop everything forever. This is what we do. The human mind just creates a binary. It's either this or that. And what you just said beautifully, it's both and it's yin and yang. And I just love that story. It has still stuck with me forever. And I went and I actually got to go down there and meet these people, and it was heartbreaking and amazing.
I think that is just such a beautiful story and such a beautiful perspective that I truly I think we're missing. But I'm also hopeful because I do feel like even hearing you say this, there's just so much more discussion around this topic. And I think that there is some hope there. There's like awareness. Like where there is an awareness, nothing can change, but there definitely is awareness. And I think that is so huge. I want to ask a very practical question, and I'm really going back to the me from a couple of years ago at the height of my burnout, like multiple burnouts, what I did to my body. I truly feel a lot of compassion for that. There are so many people, men, women, like non binary individuals who are in this place where they're listening to this and they're saying, oh my gosh, I so resonate with what you're saying, but I just don't know how to get there. I don't know what is the first step to take. I'm so burnt out. I There are layoffs happening right now. I'm panicking about my resources, my being, like all this stuff, and I think we've definitely harped on the fact that it's not about not having any fuel, it's about changing the route of the fuel and almost like changing our experience to the whole journey of creation and bringing things into the world and being productive to change that relationship. But
Mm.
for people out there who are like, how do I take the first step? Like this so resonates, but I'm still in a non-binary place where I'm a completely different person on Saturday when I get to sleep in and have a moment, and then I go to Monday and I feel like I'm at war. Like I so relate to that experience. What would you recommend for people who are in that place?
Oh, yeah. The feeling of being at war. Yeah. One, just like you beautifully modeled, have compassion for yourself. That is a skill that it took me years to learn. If you're at war, especially, and you're having trouble just surviving, then how can you just be more gentle with yourself so that you don't have to be at war outside in the office and then inside when you get home?
Mm.
Like, where can you stop the war? Where can it be for 5 minutes in the morning where you have 5 minutes to read a book or listen to a podcast or something where it has a different fuel feeling? Like for me, A New Earth was one of those books that was the beginning of me being able to read stuff like this. The Alchemist was a great place to start.
So good.
There's what I called at the time was the supplantation of spirituality. It was like a buffet. And how do you sample things to see what is authentic, what resonates for you? Undoubtedly, you've got that one friend, right? That is who is trying things and doing things and telling you about them. And even the part of you that, oh, that's not for me. It's what is something that's for you? What is something that gives you any sense of comfort, of helping you to feel alive? And I will asterisk this, that isn't just hiding out, that feels nourishing, nourishing to your body, nourishing to your soul. And how can you share this? In a lot of these companies, there's professional development budgets. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and they're like, oh, I can afford this. And I'm like, okay, did you talk to your company about potentially supporting you, sponsoring you for leadership coaching? And it was like, no. And then there's these hidden budgets that people didn't know about. They're more obvious about them now, usually for bigger companies at least. But it's investing in your development, could be going to a meditation class, just doing an insight timer on your phone, just talking to somebody about it. Come out of the closet around the feeling of being at war, because you will find you are not alone, and we need each other more than anything
Mm.
else. We need each other. But there's tons of resources online now for this. There wasn't as much when I was starting out. So I'm like, I'm so grateful for all these coaches and all these people that create all this free content. They're still trying to sell you something, but you don't have to pay for it. You just get the free stuff and like, just do the exercises. There's so much, but this is where you do have to be patient with coming back to yourself, coming back to your heart, coming back to your body. Because when we're at war, we're often in a level of disassociation. We have ejected from the body. We have ejected from any parts that might be soft and vulnerable. We're like, no, armor up. That's what you do at war. And so when you do have the weekend, like getting into practices that soften up, breath work, yoga, like I could list a bunch, but yeah, it's just, that's the first things that come to mind. Cause then eventually, I'll just say this last thing, what you'll start to feel and what I started to feel and what I've witnessed in hundreds of other people is there's these little moments of aliveness that you start to feel. These little moments of
Mm,
tingling, might be feeling of thawing some of that armor, this place where you might be listening to music, you might be at a live event, you might be just with a friend, you might be taking a walk in nature. And there's just this sense of presence that can bring us into the moment. And those are little green lights on the spiritual path that just say, pay attention. This is nourishing. This is the direction you want to be going. Let it
mm.
guide you.
I love that. I love that, and I think that there's just this theme of bringing that in, right? Because I think all too often we're so fixated on how do I get rid of this? This feels bad. I feel stressed out. I need to get rid of this. But sometimes bringing in some of the good stuff can start to balance out that plate in a way.
And start.
I'd love to ask.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think that's huge. I think I'd love to end with one more question that I think is really pertinent to this. That as you and I talked about briefly before we started recording, this podcast will be live in a couple of weeks, so it'll be after a very important time here in the US. There's this theme as well of uncertainty, I think. Like we touched on this a little bit because you were talking about the topic of surrender, which is very different than giving up, but the navigating uncertainty and navigating that feeling of uncertainty, I think in many ways feels like the foundation of what we're also talking about here, which is that there's this aspect that kind of comes with the very extractive mindset, which is scarcity, as you talked about, and there's not enough. And I think that comes back to our need for control and our resistance to uncertainty. What kind of advice would you give for someone who is dealing with that? Like dealing with the stress and anxiety of uncertainty, the kind that keeps us up at night, right? Like,
Mm.
how do we navigate that? What could be a way that we can practice living with that? Especially as we even try something that might feel more aligned with our souls, but makes us uncomfortable, or if we're just dealing with everything that's happening in the world.
Yeah. Back to compassion for yourself. It's if you could lift the lens on what is unfolding right now in your life personally, in your country politically, in the environmental, in the environment. Like there are so many things. We're going through a radical transformation, a radical shapeshift on this planet. There are things happening that happened for millions of years. And so, of course, that's terrifying when we're used to thinking in terms of 100-year lifespans. But really, if you get in touch with deep time, if you get in touch with the long view of how long this planet has been here, how species have come and gone, how it's like there's something unfolding here that is beyond our capacity to fully understand. And so when we get in touch with, and this is where indigenous wisdom can be so helpful, there's a great book called Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. And he's got a whole chapter on really thinking with the long view, really seeing what's Carl Sagan. It's like the stardust timeline that we are, so that we stop feeling like every single day we have to be in the ER, in triage. It's like there is a new, consistently new normal, right? That we're having to keep adapting to. And it's not fun. It's really hard on the nervous system, really stressful. And in order to be able to do this, in my experience personally, because when I left California, it was right around that time when the sky turned black in the middle of the day and all the street
Oh
lights were on.
gosh. Yeah, that was insane.
So that day changed my life. And I went to stay with a friend, and all around us were wildfires. And it was 500 particles per whatever in the air. And it was just like, okay, like there's a whole other layer here of adaptation that's being demanded of me. And I had to mourn. I had to mourn that I didn't have the same level of comfort, the same level of trust, the same level of safety that I, as a privileged white woman, have been used to. And that's okay to mourn that. It's okay to mourn that because part of mourning, part of grief in this unfolding, in this shape shifting is helping these identities that we're so attached to slough off more gently. Like they compost. There are these beautiful cycles to this that you brought forward. And that's happening on this planet. And so it's how do we get in service to it in a way that isn't trying to fight the unfolding and the shape shifting? It's more about, okay, what's my role here? And being willing
Mhm.
to sit in I don't know is one of the most courageous things you could possibly do.
Oof, that is so huge. I'm a huge fan of Pima Chodron, and her book When Things Fall Apart is like such touches on this so well, the topic of sitting with I don't know and sitting with hopelessness and actually how that can be as you just so well articulated, it actually can be such a freeing experience, right? Because it's the holding on that is causing so much suffering. And there's so much happening here that we can't control, right? If you're at a company right now and you're worried about layoffs, there are things that you can and cannot control, right? If you are building your own business and you're trying to grow at a certain pace, like you can't necessarily control the pace at which you grow. You can move the levers and hope for the best, but the outcome is not within our control. And so I think that is just so well
That's a
said,
great
like
point.
sitting with the I don't
That's a
know.
great point too. I think when you talk about the layoffs, because and what so many people do is they take it personally. Giant companies lay off sometimes hundred thousands of people. This isn't personal. It's really not. I know the mind is like, yeah, if I would have met my KPIs last quarter. And it's no, honey, we are, this is turned into a machine. This is part of the industrial age. This is where we've evolved. We're realizing now it's unsustainable. We absolutely cannot keep continuing to do business the way it is. So really, like, really shout out to those who are in this moment of what's going to happen next. And I want to say something crazy where it's like, if you can possibly suspend, and I know there are some people who like have kids, they have a rent due, like they don't have savings. This feels very dangerous. And so I'm not in any way trying to romanticize this. Like for those of you who need to go borrow money, they need to go live with family, do whatever you need to do and don't make it mean something. Don't make it mean that you are a failure, that you need to be ashamed. All of that is culturally inherited nonsense. I moved to a place where everyone lives with their extended family for the most part. And I moved in with my 74-year-old mother as a 44 now year old woman. And I had to spend a year being ashamed. It was like, oh, can't believe it. What a disaster. And now I can laugh about it because it was like, wait a minute, where did I come to believe that if I didn't have a job that someone else deemed important, if I didn't have a mortgage, if I didn't own this or that, then that means I'm a failure. Isn't that kind of interesting that we've all bought into this idea?
Mm,
Huh. And as you get deeper into the world of regeneration, the world of the environment, it's like community living is what's up. It's like we've lived in villages forever for a reason.
yeah,
So it's like
yeah.
really starting to question anything that you're feeling ashamed about. Like, where does that come from? Whose idea was that?
Mm.
You'll really think it's yours. And I promise you, it isn't.
Mm. Oh, so good. I love it. Bristol, I could chat with you for hours, but we are totally coming up on time. So I would love to have you wrap and share with our audience where can people find you? You don't have to spell anything out. I'll link everything below. But yes, anything you have coming up that you want to talk about, please do. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so lovely to see your shining face. You're a very radiant being. I would just share, let's see. Oh, someday, probably not for a year or two. There'll be a book that will come out, and I hope it's called The Inner Astronaut's Guide to Aliveness. So hopefully you can have that. And then I just actually had a story published and one kind of a short list for something called Voices of Regeneration. You can Google that, Voices of Regeneration. And that is a short story, a speculative fiction short story I wrote about my own father's death reimagined in a culture where burnout is honored and addressed actually legally. So that's like speculative fiction that I would love to share with people. And you can learn more about me and all the things I'm working on at my website, bristolbaughan.com. And I have a few meditations on Insight Timer. That one is about discovering what makes you come alive. And so I recommend doing that.
Oh, I love that. That is so perfect for towards the end of the year. I'm going to go check that out after this. So, this is amazing. Bristol, it was such a joy having you on. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, thank you for all your wisdom
Thank
today.
you. Lovely to connect.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Other Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I'm ever so grateful. If you want to stay connected, you can find information on how in our show notes. And finally, if you're curious about inflow and want free resources around cyclical living or moon cycles, check out inflowplanner.com. And of course, for all my listeners, you can use the code podcast10 for 10% off any purchase. All right, that's all for today. See you next time.